I'll be honest, I think Fatal Frame 2 Remake is one of the best remakes ever made, and a perfect example of how they should be done. The original game is kept almost entirely intact, but it features updated graphics and gameplay, as well as small additions to the storyline and game map that the devs originally wanted to add back in the day, but for whatever reason, usually technical, they were unable to. That being said, not everything is always able to be included, so this week, let's take a look at some of the newly added content that was finally able to join this latest remake, as well as a few things that once again just weren't able to make the cut. This is of course not an exhaustive list, but some of the stuff I thought was most interesting. As always, you'll find spoilers all throughout the video. First, we have Mio and Mayu's outfits. The default outfits that made the final cut of the game were designed to be a little more modern and realistic, while still staying close to the original designs. But here, we can see some scrap design art of what was originally going to be their default costumes. These were changed because they apparently resembled the original outfits too closely for a remake. So, they were suffering from success, I guess. The design philosophy here was that the default outfits should still feel fresh and new, so out they went. If you pre-ordered the game, however, then you can still play with a version of the original game's default outfits as DLC. Sticking with outfits, are you wondering why we can't run around with a giant camera obscura head, or dressed as Mario and Luigi this time? The devs noted that having some sort of silly costume is pretty standard across the Fatal Frame series, to help soften the horror. But this time around, they wanted to be more realistic, which is why we sadly can't run around dressed in a full ballroom gown or something. The only real holdover is the cat ears, because cat girls never die or something. They did also debate removing these, but in the end they felt they still worked well enough for the realism they were aiming for. And people do like their cat girls, so... Sadly, a few characters and ghosts were cut from the original who never ended up making the remake either. One of those was a member of the Kurosawa family, Kinuyo, who took heavy inspiration from Ubume, the ghosts of women who generally died during or close to childbirth. It's not uncommon for these ghosts to try to give their child to a living human, and should the human accept, the mother will disappear, leaving the spirit of their child to get heavier and heavier until the person holding it is crushed. Anyway, the idea behind Kinuyo was that she was sadly unable to give birth to twins, and she would use her baby, singular, to lure the player in before attacking. Ultimately, they were unable to find a good location for her in the game, however, and so she was cut. I personally find it a little sad that she wasn't able to make the remake, because the idea of the Minakami villagers being upset that they can't give birth to twins presents some interesting lore implications related to the ritual and its eventual failure due to, well, a lack of suitable twins. Maybe she'll finally get her time to shine when they remake this game for a third time, am I right? A few generic ghosts were also cut from the game. One was the Succumbed Elder. The Succumbed are ghosts that have essentially had their identities erased by the darkness, and are literally meant to be generic ghosts for the game. And the Elder version was going to be just that, but slower and slightly older looking. In the end, there was no real difference when looking at them through the camera, so they were scrapped. Another elderly ghost who didn't make the cut was the old woman killed by Kusabi. You encounter a few generic ghosts in the Kurosawa house who were victims of the Kusabi, and she was going to be a slightly different variant. But this time around they couldn't come up with a unique attack that they liked to really make her stand out, so she got the chop, just like a true Kusabi victim. And apparently the devs don't like the elderly because older mourners were also planned for the game, again, to add a little variety, but just like the Succumbed, they didn't look any different when viewed through the camera, so they were scrapped. Rest in peace, our elderly ghostly brethren, we hardly knew thee. Stepping away from elderly ghosts for a moment, another piece of cut content that never made the game was supposed to originally have Mio and Mayu climbing a cliff, using some rope while on their way back to Misono Hill. Being that Mayu has this terrible habit of seeing ghastly visions when interacting with things, however, they would realize that the very rope they were using was the same rope used to hang Sae. Sae's ghost would then appear, and the girls would black out before waking at Misono Hill. No reason was given for why this scene was cut, but presumably it interfered with the flow of the game. A pity, as it sounds kinda cool. And perhaps the most famous cut content at this point remains Misao, the twins' father. He's been mentioned in various guidebooks and interviews over the years, and the devs originally wanted to include him as a brief side story that would end with Mio glimpsing her father writhing in pain at the bottom of the abyss. For whatever reason, presumably pacing once again, he still wasn't able to make the remake, but the devs did confirm that the spirit Mio locks eyes with at the bottom of the abyss during one of the endings is him. Sadly, however, he still doesn't have any unique visuals because his story never made the game, and they figured players wouldn't know who they were supposed to be looking at anyway. However, the intention behind that ending was always Mio seeing her father down there and finally explaining why he disappeared when they were just children. He went missing while looking for the twins after Mayu injured herself in the forest, and the implication was supposed to be that Misao was taken by the village instead of the girls. He even tried to warn them shortly before the events of the game not to come near Minakami by appearing in their dreams, but they ignored those warnings, perhaps not believing them. It's a pity they were unable to find a way to implement this side story as well, but it's likely they just had too much going on with all the other new side story content. But hey, maybe next time he can rock up with Kinuyo as well, who knows? Third time's the charm. Of course, it wasn't all cut content, and several new things were also added to the remake. One of the first new additions we come across is the Kayano area. We can find this new location next to the Tsuchihara house, and it was added because the devs realized that Minakami village has a lot of thatched roof houses, but no reeds to be making those roofs from. And realizing how eerie it is to walk through a giant open area full of reeds at night, unsure of what might be lurking in it, we gain access to it almost right away. Next to this, we can find the Minakami settlement area. This area always existed, in a way, but was never included in the original, presumably for space and technical reasons. It's vaguely mentioned in old guidebooks where Makabe talks about numerous smaller houses all facing the Kurosawa house, but this time they finally got to put it in and allow us to explore the area. These tightly packed houses offer a nice contrast to the open area just outside with all the tall grass, providing a different kind of claustrophobic horror. Another addition is the Eikado Temple, located between the Kureha Shrine and Kurosawa House. This, according to the devs, serves the same purpose as the Kurosawa's altar room, and the village's priests pray there before moving on to the shrine. All the candles inside are offerings for those who died in the disaster, and to keep the twins' symbolism going strong, the statues are also tied together with red cords, something they felt was necessary as their large size made them seem a little distant from each other. And we also get to finally visit the Umbral Mound, something that only ever appeared in cutscenes in previous games. It's here that we see Makabe take a picture with the camera obscura and he realizes that it really does capture the other side. This time around, we can go and do the same thing, and enjoy a friendly little encounter with Makabe's spirit as well. We also have the Ukishima area, which was visible in the original game, but inaccessible. We're now living in the future with better technology and more available space, so they were able to properly add it this time around. And by extension, the underground lake area down below was also expanded. Originally just a small underground pool formed by water leaking above, now the devs were able to turn it into a proper underground lake, and probably one of my favourite areas in the entire game. Look at it, just gorgeous. By the same token, the devs were also able to expand the deep path leading to the abyss, and by extension, expand the lore a little as well. For the remake, we can see numerous failed kusabis on our way down, something we could only just barely glimpse in the original. These serve as a reminder of the horrors that truly took place in this village over the years, and the lengths Minakami often had to go to appease the abyss. And finally, this part is more subtle, at least until you reach the ending, but this time around, the devs were able to implement the passing of time better. You may notice the environment and village changing slightly with each chapter to indicate time is indeed still moving, but when you finally hit the end of the game, it becomes immediately evident when the moon suddenly appears and turns crimson. This was apparently implemented because someone at the offices asked why the moon wasn't red like the butterflies. And the devs were like, huh, a damn good question. So, now the moon is red. Thanks, random guy at the Koei Tecmo offices. Of course, this isn't all of the new or cut content, but some of the stuff I found to be the most interesting. What did you guys think? Are there things you still wish had been added or even removed? Let me know in the comments below, and I'll see you again next time.